Kia ora and welcome to the Baptist People podcast, where we shine a light on some of the interesting, motivated and dedicated people from our faith community. I'm Christine Strite, and today I'm talking to professional violist and viola teacher Fiona Haughton. Fiona has toured with Chamber Music New Zealand and New Zealand Baroque, and she is a casual player for the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra viola sections. As a freelance musician, she works with many groups including the Auckland Chamber Orchestra, Bach Musica and Auckland Choral. She also performs with the Kulios String Quartet in the Candlelight concerts in Auckland and Hamilton. Fiona is a trained Suzuki violin teacher and has a huge passion for helping community musicians thrive. Kia ora, Fiona. It's lovely to have you here. And you brought your viola with you. What are you going to play for us a bit later?
Yes, I did, Christine. Yes, so later I'd love to play you an excerpt of Danny Boy. Okay,
we look forward to that. Fiona, tell us a wee bit about yourself.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm a viola player and a violin viola teacher, and I live in West Auckland. I'm married to the wonderful Micah, and I have 4 children, including a set of twins, which was somewhat unexpected in my life.
Are they the older or?
They're the youngest of the family. So yes, we did imagine that we would have 3 children, but have ended up with 4. So that's been a delight now that they're 8 years old.
So you are a trained classical musician, but you are doing more modern music, aren't you, with the Candlelight concerts? Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yes, I play a huge range of music actually in my profession, but around 4 or 5 years ago we began playing for these Candlelight concerts. Didn't really know what they were at first when I was asked to do one, so I did it rather begrudgingly, but it's developed into be one of the great joys of my performance life actually, because so how these concerts work is they're in themes. So we'll do tribute to Queen will be one of the concerts, or we'll do Swan Lake, so ballet music from ballet with dancers, or we'll do Coldplay Imagine Dragons concert, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, things like that. And so often the people that come to these concerts are actually people that have never been to a concert before, a classical instrument concert. And so the joy that they express in hearing this music that they already love performed in a string quartet setting, so the acoustic depth that can bring, and it's often the first time they've heard a string quartet or heard a classical concert, and the response they give is it was very unexpected for me actually. I hadn't thought about that going into these concerts, and it feels a real honour to have the chance to provide that experience for them. And we really work hard to produce a really good concert so that they can have that moment of beauty and rest and joy.
Yeah. So you started playing the violin, but you play the viola now. Can you just tell me the difference between the two instruments?
Yeah, sure. So the viola is slightly bigger in size, and it also is a fifth lower. So it has one lower string than the violin has, and it doesn't have the top string that the violin has. And in terms of the string parts, if you think about a typical string quartet, which is 2 violin parts, then a viola part, and then a cello part on the bass, it fits in between that second violin and cello part. So it's considered one of the inner parts of the string quartet. And it has a bit of a connection with the cello where sometimes it's supporting the bass line, but it can also be quite a melodic instrument as well.
So how did you start off playing those instruments? Violin first, I guess.
Yeah, well, with violin, so my parents were both interested in music. They both learnt piano, I think, as children, and Mum also learnt organ as a shout out to Mum, hi at Cityside Baptist. And so they were interested in music, and they discovered the Suzuki method, and they took us along to a concert, me and my 2 older sisters, when we were very young. I think I was 5 or 4 possibly. And Mum always tells the story that over that next week after we'd been to the concert, we all individually came to her, the other sisters knowing, and begged Mum that could we please start learning the violin. So apparently that's how it all started.
Okay, yeah.
And then with viola, I came to that as a teenager. There's a really well-known competition for high school for chamber music groups, for classical chamber music groups. In my day, it was called the Westpac Chamber Music Competition. I think it's got another name now. And that was always a big deal for teenage classical musicians. You'd, get in a group and you'd spend all year preparing, and it was a really big deal. And so there generally are less viola players. So I had the chance to join this group through playing the viola. So that was my first experience with playing viola, and I've kind of dabbled in it slowly and just grown to love it more and more, and to be asked to do more and more work on viola until now. At this point, I only play viola professionally. Right. So, and I'm very happy about that switch.
Yeah. So can you tell me a weeny bit about how the instrument is put together? We were talking earlier about the strings and what they're made of,
yes.
And maybe a bit how they've changed over time.
Yes. Also, because one of the other groups I play with is NZ Baroque, and in that group we use instruments that are either from the Baroque era or they've been modelled after instruments that were made around that time. And I guess through treatises, books and artworks from that time, we can see how they used to play the violin or the stringed instruments, how their technique was, and how the instrument looked, which was different, because like anything, the violin and viola have developed over history according to what they've been needed to be used for. So for example, in the Baroque era, the strings of the instruments were actually made of gut.
Okay. Yep.
Animal gut.
Yep.
And so in NZ Baroque, when we play our Baroque instruments, we also play on gut strings.
I see. How does it change the sound?
Well, because a gut string is, an organic material, it has an incredible warmth and versatility and flexibility. So it's a real joy to play on gut strings, because the nuance and the kind of the artistry, I guess, you can create by playing on a gut string is wonderful. It's a revelation, but it does come with its pitfalls, because again, being organic material, it's very susceptible to the weather, changes in the weather, changes in temperature, and so obviously if you sweat more, or if you it's hot under the concert lights or whatever, the strings will go out of tune much more easily. It can be a bit stressful.
Can you tell, have you got any anecdotes about that?
Yes, so I mostly play viola these days, but when I would always be playing violin, because the E string on the violin is particularly thin, and being made of gut, susceptible to this change in temperature. And it's very common for E strings to snap, actually, in performances, and it does sound a bit like a gunshot going off. And I seem to have particularly, must be something about my sweat that particularly seems to erode the gut strings very fast. And so this happens to me a lot of times in concerts, much to the delight of the audience, I must say, because I think when you attend a live performance, that's one of if something happens on the stage, it's very exciting. And so either they'd observe me rushing out to change my string, or we'd have a spare violin sitting on the side, so I'd go and pick that one up and just keep playing.
I guess it makes it memorable and human as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing with live performance. Even though it was a bit stressful for me, it did provide a great memory for the audience.
Imagine. And it whips your face. Does the string?
It can do, depending on where it breaks and what angle. So it's a little bit stressful for the performer.
The dangers.
I know. Fortunately, I wear glasses, so that's somewhat helpful.
Fiona, so tell me a bit about your faith journey. Did you grow up in a Baptist church?
I didn't grow up in a Baptist church. I grew up attending with my family Te Atatu Bible Chapel out there in Te Atatu Peninsula. And really enjoyed, I have great memories of, going to Sunday school there and youth group. And I have great memories of, I loved singing, in church all together. And I guess it would have been kind of late 80s, early 90s. So it was kind of the scripture and song era, and I loved those songs. I remember, as the deer pants for the water. Even as a child, those lyrics I loved, and they made a really big impression on me. And Calvary, we're set free. That's another one I really remember. And I also remember, again, it was of its time, but it's a memory that's really stuck with me, that it was obviously the thing in vogue to do at that time too. Sometimes the worship leader would say, and now just the men.
Yes.
And then the men would sing a verse, and now just the women.
Right. Yeah.
And I have really strong memories of enjoying that, even though it's probably not something, I would seek to do these days.
Okay. Is music really that important in worship? It's one of those questions I thought I would stir with. Because the Bible encourages us to sing and play music as a way of worshipping, but we're not all musically inclined, are we? So what would you say to that?
Well, my deep belief is that music is something, an amazing design by God, a fundamental design in his creation for us, for the creation as a whole and for us as individuals. And I actually really believe that all of us are fundamentally musical.
There'd be a lot of people who are so happy to hear that.
And that one could even say, I'm alive, therefore I'm musical.
Yeah.
And I think that if you see the way music is observed in our communities and in our development as humans, and if you observe the way that music works within us and our connection to God, I think this design is this plan from God is a really amazing thing. And I've even had one person tell me, I would say hopefully a very reliable source, because they're a Baptist pastor, I'm sure they're a very reliable source, saying that if you look at the original, Greek of the Bible, that when God talks about singing in the Bible, it's a command, or it's a gift to humans, to his creation. So according to this pastor, apparently the angels and things don't actually sing in the same way that humans are invited to sing. So that would imply that music or singing is a special, unique gift from a creator to his precious creation. And I just think that is an amazing thing.
Can you talk a wee bit about how music connects us as well as people? We have, you were mentioning before, a modern concept of the audience and the performer, and it's become a bit specialised. They are good at music. I'm not. We're separate.
Yeah, that's right.
But music can actually connect us, and we should just drop all those thoughts of, so-and-so is special because they can play or sing or whatever. Yeah, we're all musical.
That's right. And so it's relatively recent in our history that we've kind of divided ourselves up into the performers and the audience, or the musical and the non-musical. And if you look at traditional societies, music was a part of almost every facet of their society. So whether it was their work, if you're thinking about the singing in the fields, that served a purpose. If you think about education, whether it was using chants or rhymes to learn things, or people singing the folk songs of their cultures, or even the singing of stories. I think the bards of old, that sang the histories of their group to teach the next generation. Or, for socialising and entertainment. I mean, music, in the homes was one of the primary ways of experiencing that. And I was reading recently in one of the Laura Ingalls books about how she went to, they were living in quite a small town, and that was their kind of Friday night kind of way to meet the other young people, was they'd go to their choir practice.
My grandmother played the piano and my grandfather played the violin, and my mum loves telling the story of how they'd invite locals around and they'd have us sing along.
Great.
Which, to me sounds so old-fashioned, but would be around the piano and people would come because that was, that's what you did. And nobody's thought, oh, I can't sing or anything, because you've got your voices together.
Yes.
The piano would drown out any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the incredible thing is that this there's so much science, beautiful science around this, where when a group of people sing together or create beat together, they are actually producing lots of endorphins, and they are actually chemically bonding as a group when you do that. And I've heard this lots of times in my life, and I heard it most recently at one of the Nathan Wallace the brain trust that he runs. One of his presentations, he reminded us of this, and it's an amazing thing. And so, but the thing is, I think we can't ignore the fact that for most adults in New Zealand today, this experience of growing up in the environment of music and community music making hasn't been their experience. And so I think for people, if you find yourself, thinking things like, oh, I can't sing, or I don't connect to music, or I'm not musical, that is a really normal place to find yourself in, because you haven't been formed in that way. You haven't had the opportunity. And, recently at our church, we just finished the series on apprenticing to God and what it means to be an apprentice to Jesus. And one of the things that was talked about quite a bit was, formation. So we're being formed all the time, and sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's unintentional. And so for most adults in New Zealand, we've been unintentionally formed into being not confident with music, or not seeing ourselves as musicians. And so we can't take that fact away. That's just with some of that knowledge of community music making, or some of that environment has been lost. But what would it mean if we started from a point of belief that music was a fundamental and deep way that we could find a connection, an even greater connection with God?
Everyone would be singing in church.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and it does, like any spiritual discipline, it doesn't just happen. So it's not like just because you then believe that you'll suddenly be good at singing. Like our prayer journey, or our Bible reading journey, or our faith journey, these things tend to unfold slowly and beautifully, and with help from those who know how to encourage, and who have the skill set. So, are trained in singing themselves, or trained in community music making. Oh, and one more thing just about music and how, its role, the way I see kind of this amazing design of God is that, we've all had this experience, I think, where we've been in certain situations in life where we might have heard some talking, some really beautiful words. It might have been a sermon in church, or it might be a funeral that you've been to, where you've heard a lot of stories, about the person that's died, and so you're processing all these things that you've heard, and then a song will start, and what happens? Immediately the emotions are triggered, and often that's when the tears will flow, right? Is once that music starts. And I think this is the great gifting of music, that particularly music without words, is that it gives us this chance to sometimes process things. I believe that God works through it to help us process things that we understand on a subconscious level, so that we understand at a really deep level, and we may not even always be able to explain in words what has been processed, but some process has happened in our heart and our mind, and I think that's a really beautiful gift.
There's evidence, isn't there, that music predates speech. And so if you think about it, a song comes on after a funeral or a sermon, and it can really stir your emotions in a way that the words have not been able to, but the music actually can.
You can bring it all together.
Yeah. Okay, so Baroque music. Now, Baroque, I better say that what was the era for Baroque music? 1600s?
Oh, yeah, around 1600s, 1750, that kind of
era. And so musicians at that time were Bach, Beethoven?
Not so much Beethoven, Bach, Telemann. Lolly.
Okay, so that music was written for praising and worshipping God, wasn't it? Because I did read that Bach dedicated all his music to the Lord, but I know that you had a view on that where you were talking about how do we know? How do we know that Bach really was a Christian or really loved God?
And I think it's a tricky thing when it comes to music, particularly classical music, because obviously, you know, throughout history and particularly in that era, the church and the state were, you know, incredibly integrated, almost one and the same, really, weren't they? And so a lot of composers worked for churches or worked for the king who would commission music and things like that. And a lot of concerts were performed in churches and cathedrals and had religious themes. And so it's one of those things I think we'll just never really know. Like, did those composers have a genuine deep faith? Was it a cultural faith? Who knows? We're never going to know. And I think, I think it's just, we have to be careful that we don't therefore talk about some music as good or some music as bad, or, you know, I mean, that's the way I like to look at music, is that every piece of music that's written is an expression of the human heart in some form, you know, and that by a person that's a child of God, that's been created by God, you know. And so some music we won't prefer, or there are some types of music that will potentially, not be helpful to listen to over and over. You know, if it's got lyrics about drugs and drinking and things, and you know, it's like, what are you forming yourself with? But the thing I like to think even then is like, what is that music teaching us? What's it showing us about the human condition, or that human's heart? What's it revealing to us? What's the invitation from God in that music to see those people as children of God, or to see how the love of God would really be for them too?
What do you listen to, Fiona, yourself at home or in the car or whatever?
Well, funnily enough, I actually really enjoy silence. I guess I play a lot of music in my working life, and not that I don't love listening to music, but I think just that's probably my personality, that when I need to reflect on things or process life, I really enjoy silence and sounds of nature to do that.
Fair enough. So how have you seen your music affect people?
I've been so lucky in my life and career to be, witness to a few amazing moments where you've just seen the power of music, which, in my mind, it's the Holy Spirit really, just flow through and impact people, and a friend of mine was working at this hospital wing of a rest home, and she asked me to come and play. So I always prepare a few things, a selection of hymns and songs, and it's fantastic these days with YouTube, because I can find almost any backing track I want to, or accompaniment track. It's incredible, and I just have my $8 Kmart Bluetooth speaker, and away I go and play along with accompaniment. So the wonderful thing with music is it, like we were talking about with the candlelight concerts, we're starting from this place or this base of music people know, and it can really be so powerful and draw them out. And it's the same thing, when you're playing for people in a rest home setting, like if you can connect in with music they know or are familiar with or have an emotional connection with, then the result is so powerful. Yeah. And so my friend would, tell me things about the people, so then I could think what to play. So there was a former pastor there, so I played quite a few hymns for him, and then there was someone else who was from Ireland, so I'd play some songs, and then she said to me, oh, this lady was a ballerina. And so in this hospital ward, it's not a dementia ward, but people generally were very kind of end of life, so had very limited movements, often not really responsive at all.
Right.
So not necessarily talking, or it had to be helped to eat and drink and things like that. And so she told me this lady was formerly a ballerina, and I said, okay, I can play some Swan Lake. So I just found a YouTube accompaniment track and started playing it. And so this lady who'd been I'd been playing probably already 40 minutes or so, And this lady had just been sitting there, I guess somewhat catatonic the whole time. And I started playing Swan Lake, and literally within probably 30 seconds, she started moving her arms like a ballerina.
Wow.
And she was doing the form of the dance of the dying swan, which is the famous dance in Swan Lake. And she was doing that dance.
Wow.
And it was just like to see that happening in front of my eyes of someone who had just been sitting there.
She's so responsive to that music.
Yeah,
Wow.
it unlocked something deep within her. And that was just, again, I
Chills.
I had chills.
You talked about learning to work less hard. And you had twins and 2 other children, so you were tireder and didn't always manage to prepare as well as you would have when you had no children. Can you talk a wee bit about that?
Yes, because I think there's to performing. There's 2 parts. There's the practice you do, and the prep you do, the hard work you do, and then there's the performance itself. And I think what's not always understood is that the job of a performer is to discover how to arrive at the performance situation and be able to bring off their best in that moment. And it's not always connected with the hard work beforehand. So there's a transition that has to happen that connects the work you've done with the ability to be completely in the moment of the performance and to be crafting and creating and to feel free in the moment and to be completely aware of the environment you're in. So if you're playing with other musicians, you're listening and you're responding to them, you're playing with good ensemble, things like that. So probably what I didn't understand as a younger person was how to make that transition. So, you might work really hard and practice hours and hours and hours, but if you can't bridge that gap, then unfortunately you'll always feel frustrated and disappointed with what sometimes your hard work doesn't come out in the performance, and it can take, for some people that's a very natural skill, and for others and I think it can be tempting to say, oh well, much like whether you think you're musical or not, you might say, well, I'm not made for performance, or that's not for me, or I'm obviously not talented at that. But my experience is that it's took me many, many years to learn that. 20 years or more, and but gosh, it was worth the wait. Yeah. So I'm glad I didn't give up on that.
So you had twins and you had 2 older children. And you still had to do a performance. Can you just tell me a bit about what that's like? Well,
I think because I'm someone who, when I perform, my body is quite hypersensitive, so I do tend to, perhaps, get the extra heart palpitations or the, the shaking or the sweat, that kind of thing, And I think what happened to me when I had twins, which was a real unexpected blessing, was that I was so physically exhausted and emotionally exhausted that I had no capacity to give even one more bit of physicality in my body, or to overly think about how I was doing or what people were thinking of it. And so really what it did is completely freed me from that. And so my body learned how to respond in those situations without the extra physicality. And I feel that now that my children are older, my body's retained that memory of how it can do that. But I'm so grateful for that, because it just was completely freeing for me to just be so at the end of myself that I had nothing more to give, and then just would play from that place, and realising that was actually enough. That was okay.
You gave yourself.
And in fact, sometimes it was even better because it released that more genuine part of myself.
You were talking about celebrating the ordinariness as well of just playing music.
And I think that's one of the things that the process of learning a musical instrument, particularly with this Suzuki pedagogy, can really show us, is just how most of, learning a musical instrument is very ordinary. You get it out every day, hopefully. You play the pieces. In Suzuki, we do a lot of repetition, so we play we call it review, so we play the songs we already know, because that's how we can then learn new skills and develop from the place of strength. And it's most children don't like to practice, so most times there's some kind of disagreement with the parent, or some kind of struggle, and the parent has to cajole the child.
Yes, I've had that. Yeah.
So this is the ordinary everyday, and then they might practice for however long they practice, and then they put the instrument away and nothing very profound has happened, But you put all those little moments of quite ordinary things together over years and years, over 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, suddenly, what do you arrive at? You arrive at a child who can play a quite complex piece by memory, maybe a 5-minute piece, but completely by memory, with beautiful tone, beautiful intonation. Something quite beautiful and stunning has happened, but it's been made up of this collection of very ordinary moments. And I think that can be a great analogy, or a great what's the word? It can teach us a lot also about our faith journey, because I think the same things apply. Our daily faith journey, getting to know, apprenticing to Jesus. I would say, for most of us, most of the time looks very much like this. We have our ordinary lives. We go to work. We attend church, we, look after our children, and we don't always feel these, profound things. In order to go deep in our apprenticeship, we have to have these habits, these quite ordinary habits that help form us. And then if you put all those days, those little moments together, you find something, a really beautifully deep faith, a long-lasting faith.
And Fiona, you're going to play Danny Boy for us, aren't you?
That's right.
It's also a hymn written by the Irish Baptist evangelist William Fullerton back in the 1800s. It's called I Cannot Tell. Tell me again why you've picked Danny Boy.
Well, because it was my granny's, one of her favourites, and Tuesday would have been her 96th birthday.
Lovely. Fiona, thank you so much for talking with me today. I've really enjoyed having you here. Thanks so much, and God bless.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine.